glass doesn't have a crystalline form. It doesn't have a crystalline structure to it. That's why we can use it for optics. Because when the light passes through the glass, we can actually cause it to bend rather than be diffracted by all the crystals, okay? And of course, since it never crystallizes, what that also means is that it never becomes a solid. Because one of the criteria of being solid is that the material has crystalline structure, it has crystalline form to it. Well, since glass never crystallizes, that means it never does what it's supposed to do to become a solid. So you can't call it a solid. And then, of course, you can't call it a liquid because it acts like a solid. It does what other solids do. Now, there's kind of an interesting thing about glass, is that it has a long history. And we didn't always understand the history of glass. I mean, forensic historians have helped us solve a lot of problems, but not all of them. One of them is that people used to believe that glass was a liquid because of old windows in Europe. They seemed to be thicker on the bottom of the window pane than they were at the top of the window pane. And so they always believed that glass must be in motion, it must be flowing. But if that were true, why doesn't the glass pull away from the top of the pane also? But it doesn't do that, okay? And so they thought glass was flowing, but then they started realizing, well, something's not right here. And so they started looking into how the windows used to be made. Nowadays, when we make window glass, we have this process called floating glass. And we can make glass all exactly the same thickness. Now, back then, though, when they made glass, they would blow a big bubble and spin the bubble out into a large plate. And then they would cut the sections of the window out of the plate. Now, back then, we also had craftsmen's guilds. And one of the rules in the Craftsman's Guild said that if you have glass that's thicker on one side than on the other, you put the thick part at the bottom of the window pane. And of course, if you didn't follow the Craftsman's rules, you were taken out of the guild, okay? And so the window panes were always thicker at the bottom than they were at the top. So yeah, glass is not a liquid, it's not a solid. It's not a gas, it's not a plasma. What is it? Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's just glass. It used to be that glass was the only material that we knew of that was like this, that it didn't crystallize when it cooled, but it still acted like a solid. And of course, since it was the only one, we couldn't make up a category for it. Because one thing is not a category, one thing is an anomaly. So glass would always just be seen as an anomaly. And then they started making more. We have more materials that act like glass, that don't crystallize when they cool. And so, well, basically they made up another category. Glass is actually what's called an amorphous or amorphic solid. Liquids, solids, gases, plasmas, amorphic solids, Bose-Einstein condensates, Reidenberg, time crystals. There's so many different matter categories. Of course, now we're starting to realize that they aren't really matter categories. Actually, they're energy categories, okay? Energy categories. Okay, now, I've let this thing cool, and it's become actually pretty hard. So the next thing is to add more glass. So I'm literally just going to push this into the molten glass that's already in the bottom of the crucible, and then I just turn it a couple of times to give me a nice layer of clear glass over the top of the bubble. And that's how I increase the size of the piece, is I just simply added more mass. All right, now I need to shape that mass, so I'm going to take this amazing tool and then just begin to slowly make sure that I keep the clear glass very even around the bubble that's inside of there. Keeping the clear glass even around that bubble inside of there is important, because if you don't, the piece will blow out crooked and it gets awkward and it gets very misshapen. And then you have to call it sculpture and sell it for more money. It's just terrible.